Hello there, it's the second rest day in the Anand Gelfand World Championship match, and that gives us a chance to step back and look at the match as a whole. I know there are a lot of people who have been rather disappointed with the game so far. We've had 4 draws and perhaps they haven't been the most riveting games. Well, one was quite exciting. But I think this is just a part of World Championship chess actually. It's pretty normal. I think when you get 2 top players, they match each other very well and draws are inevitable. I'd like to remind you that, for example, in the first 8 games of the Kasparov-Anand World Championship match in 1995, they were drawn. Kasparov-Kramnik in 2000, their final, had 7 draws in a row. Going back further, Karpov and Kasparov, 17 draws in a row in 1984-85. And going back further, Capablanca and Alekhine in 1927 had a run of 8 draws in a row. Now, I do appreciate that these were matches of a different length. However, I think the point I'm making is that when players are of a roughly equal strength, that's what happens sometimes. It reminds me a little bit of actually World Cup football finals. Often they're not the most exciting matches. They're still the 2 best teams though, but they're not often a great spectacle. I don't believe that this is the end of classical chess, as some commentators have been predicting. It seems to me that in every age it's predicted that the game has played itself out, and in this age in particular, because of the strength of computers and the strength of preparation, then I realise that that argument is perhaps stronger. Even so, I think this is more to do with the fact that the players' styles are perhaps, well, they're more risk averse and they're very well matched indeed. I think a best comparison with a World Championship match, I know I've said about all these draws in previous finals, I think a best comparison is with the final 2 years ago between Anand and Topalov. And there, of course, computers were very strong, their preparation was excellent, but the styles of the players were very different indeed, and we had quite a few decisive games, and in fact the whole match was tremendous. So I don't think computers are spelling the end of classical chess, not by any stretch. And personally, I found this match so far fascinating. I know we haven't seen thrilling attacking chess, and I love attacking chess, but we've seen some fine defensive play, and that's what I would like to look at here actually, instead of discussing everything else. So let me focus in on the defensive play of Anand in particular, which I've thought was excellent, and his endgames in games 2 and 4 with the bishop against the knight. Well, here this was game 4. Let me just highlight one particular moment. And here Gelfand played king to e2, but I'd like to look at what happens on rook c6 if the rooks are exchanged. Now, this is an attempt by white to play the king up to the queen side and take the pawn. It's just not in time though, because the black king can come over and king c5 is the best move, and white even has to be a little bit careful. You never know, these pawns could be vulnerable because the king is good. It should be a draw. But I want to mention another way to play for black, and that's to play knight d5. It's not as good, but it's still possible. And then to set up this defensive fortress. The knight here covers these squares, and the pawn here covers these squares. So there is simply no way through for white's king. It's a perfect defensive barrier, and the king can simply take care of the pawns on the king side, and white has no way through. You can play b4, but the pawn just gets taken. Again, there's still this wonderful barrier. There is no way through for the white king. This is a very common defensive technique, and let me show you another game. There's another game that springs to mind when I see this defensive idea. This is a game between Walter Brown, the 6-time US champion, And Tigran Petrosian, of course, former world champion in 1963 to 1969. And this was played in the Las Palmas interzonal tournament 30 years ago in 1982. Now, let me paint the picture. Walter Brown here has the white pieces, and he has pressure. Got his rook here and bishop here attacking this pawn here. Now, he decided to exchange queens. That takes away another defensive piece from the d-pawn. And now white has a very clear plan here, and that's to advance the g-pawn, maybe advance the king as well, and squeeze black. Push the knight out away and take on d5. And black is very tied up here. Petrosian, a master of defence, recognised the danger and found a beautiful defensive idea. Let me show you. He played the knight back to g8. I mean, this is absolutely brilliant. He simply gave up the pawn on d5, and I'll show you why. Well, you can't play bishop takes because then you actually lose material after f6. So if white is going to take the pawn, he must play rook takes d5, and this is what happens. So now white is a clear pawn up. Now, advantage of bishop against knight in the endgame, a clear pawn up. You'd think perhaps good chances to win. Let's see how Petrosian set up a beautiful defensive fortress. Here is the key idea. The knight is switching to d6. Now let's see how this worked. g5. You could also play f6 here, but let's see what happens. f4. White is trying to break through with the king. f6. Now that's a very important move. The pawn takes away the e5 square, and the king cannot advance, of course, because there is a check on d6. So let's go back. So Brown had to play bishop d3 and now knight d6. Now this is the fortress position that I wanted to show you. Take a look. The pawn here controls these squares. The knight controls this square, and this square and this square. And this pawn here controls these squares. Now look, all those squares are protected, and there is absolutely no way in for white. You can try around here, but black's king can cover. There is no way in for white. It's absolutely beautiful. In fact, this pawn gets in the way. If there were no pawn, the king could perhaps try to get in here, but there is no way through because of that extra pawn. That's the irony of the situation. Let's see what happened. Brown tried to break through on the king's side. They actually agreed to draw here. Let's see what happens if white, for example, tries to make a breakthrough. There is still no way in. For example, here, and there is absolutely nothing to do. That is the perfect defensive fortress. It's worth remembering this technique when the pawn and the knight are on the same colour square. They actually complement each other beautifully. Hope you enjoyed that, and see you for the rest of the games in this thrilling World Championship match.